Masters, mistresses, the Doctor requires materials in order to maintain the TARDIS and ensure continued functionality. He similarly requires carbon-based comestibles to sustain his own biological functions and existence. Master would never say this, but he requires aid beyond that supplied by this unit in order to acquire these. To aid the Doctor in his various tasks and creations, this can be most effectively achieved via Patreon or Substack subscriptions, or through donations directly to PayPal. Or if you desire physical goods in return for your contributions, written accounts of my travels with the Doctor are also available on Amazon. Links are in the description below. Thank you, masters, mistresses.
Hi, Dr. Alex here, and welcome to Beyond the Horizon, Episode 4. This one is Homeopathy, the Test. This episode of Horizon is one of the few where the Horizon team actually paid scientists or asked scientists to volunteer their time to conduct or repeat experiments and verify whether or not the results were valid. And in this particular example, it was for homeopathy, whether or not it worked, and what was known as the memory of water. Because there were one or two actual scientists with credible scientific credentials to their name who had claimed to find results in favour of water having a memory, of homeopathy actually possibly having some scientific basis. It's hard to think of a more worthwhile use of public money by a public broadcaster than to be conducting scientific experiments to determine whether or not the results were valid. It's a shame that the same broadcaster today seems unable to rise to this challenge.
This week, Horizon is doing something completely different. For the first time, we are conducting our own experiment. We are testing a form of medicine which could transform the world. Should the results be positive, this man will have to give us $1 million.
Do the tests, prove that it works, and win $1 million.
But if the results are negative, then millions of people, including some of the most famous and influential in the world, may have been wasting their money. The events that would lead to Horizon's $1 million challenge began with Professor Madeline Ennis, a scientist who may have found the impossible.
I was incredibly surprised and really had great feelings of disbelief.
Her work concerns a type of medicine which defies the laws of science.
If Madeline Ennis turns out to be right, it means that science has missed a huge chunk of something.
She has reawakened one of the most bitter controversies of recent years.
Madeline Ennis's experiments cannot be right. I mean, they're preposterous.
I have no explanation for what happened. However, this is science. If we knew the answers to the questions, we wouldn't bother doing the experiments.
It's all about something you can find on every high street in Britain. Homeopathy. Homeopathy isn't some wacky fringe belief. It's over 200 years old and is used by millions of people, including presidents and pop stars. It's even credited with helping David Beckham get over his foot injury. And royals have been keen users since the days of Queen Victoria. But it's also a scientific puzzle. What makes it so mysterious is its two guiding principles, formulated in the 18th century. The first principle is that to find a cure, you look for a substance that actually causes the symptoms you're suffering from. It's the principle that like cures like.
For instance, in colds and hay fever, something we often use is allium cepa, which is onion. And of course, we all know the effect of chopping an onion with a sore, streaming eyes, streaming nose, sneezing. And so we would use allium cepa, onion, for a cold with similar sorts of features.
Onions. He's talking about onions. Of course, Latin always makes things sound more scientific and well thought out. Expelliarmum! This reminds me of something I said in one of the previous episodes, I think it was one of the Atlantis ones, about doctors not being scientists. But if there's ever a more obvious example than this homeopath to the Queen who has a doctor in front of his name, well, I'd say this is all the evidence you really need. And on a more serious note, I would remind you that scientific research is generally not conducted by medical doctors. It's conducted by biomedical scientists and other scientists in related fields.
This theory that like cures like led to thousands of different substances being used, some of them truly bizarre.
In principle, you can make a homeopathic remedy out of absolutely anything. That's plant,
Deadly nightshade,
animal,
snake venom,
mineral,
calcium carbonate, which is of course chalk,
disease product,
tuberculous gland of a cow.
radiation.
But then homeopaths found that many of these substances were poisonous, so they started to dilute them. This led to the extraordinary second principle of homeopathy. The more you dilute a remedy, the more effective it becomes, provided it's done in a special way. The method homeopaths use to this day is called serial dilution. A drop of the original substance, whether it's snake venom or sulfuric acid, is added to 99 drops of water or alcohol. Then the mixture is violently shaken. Here it's done by machine. But traditionally, homeopaths would hit the tube against a hard surface. Either way, homeopaths believe this is a vital stage. It somehow transfers the healing powers from the original substance into the water itself. The result is a mixture diluted 100 times.
That will give you what's called a 1C solution. That's 1 part in 100. You then take that 1C solution and dissolve it in another 99 parts, and now you end up with a 2C solution.
At 2C, the medicine is 1 part in 10,000. But the homeopaths keep diluting, and this is where the conflict with science begins. At 6C, the medicine is diluted a million times. This is equivalent to 1 drop in 20 swimming pools. Another 6 dilutions gives you 12C. This is equivalent to 1 drop in the Atlantic Ocean. But even this is not enough for most homeopathic medicines. A typical dilution is 30C, a truly astronomical level of dilution.
1 drop in all of the oceans on Earth would be much more concentrated than that. I would have to go off the planet to make that kind of dilution.
But homeopaths believe that a drop of this ultra-dilute solution placed onto sugar pills can cure you. That's why homeopathy is so controversial, because science says that makes no sense whatsoever.
There is a limit to how much we can dilute any substance. We can only dilute it down to the point that we have 1 molecule left. The next dilution, we probably won't even have that 1 molecule.
It's possible to go back and count how many molecules are present in a homeopathic dose. And the astonishing answer is absolutely none. There's less than a chance in a million, less than a chance in a billion that there's a single molecule.
A molecule is the smallest piece of a substance you can have. So for something to have any effect at all, conventional science says you need 1 molecule of it at the very least.
Science has, through many different experiments, shown that when a drug works, it's always through the way the molecule interacts with the body. And so the discovery that there's no molecules means absolutely there's no effect.
That's why science and homeopathy have been at war for over 100 years. The homeopaths say that their remedies have healing powers. Science says they're nothing but water. Then one scientist claimed the homeopaths were right after all. Jacques Benveniste was one of France's science superstars. He had a string of discoveries to his name, and some believed he was on his way to earning a Nobel Prize.
I was considered as, in French we have a word which says Nobelizable, which means we can't have a Nobel Prize because I started from scratch a whole field of research. I was the head of a very large team, a lot of money, so I was a very successful person.
Benveniste was an expert in the field of allergy. In particular, he was studying a type of blood cell involved in allergic reactions, the basophil. When basophils come into contact with something you're sensitive to, they become activated, causing the telltale symptoms. Benveniste had developed a test that could tell if a person was allergic to something or not. He added a kind of dye that only turns inactive basophils blue. So, by counting the blue cells, he could work out whether there had been a reaction. But then, something utterly unexpected started to happen.
A technician told me one day, I don't understand because I have diluted a substance that is activating basophils to a point where it should work and it still works.
The researcher had taken a chemical and added water, just like homeopaths do. The result should have been a solution so dilute it had absolutely no effect. And yet, bizarrely, there was a reaction. The basophils had been activated. Benveniste knew this shouldn't have been possible.
I remember saying to her, this is water, so it cannot work.
Benveniste's team was baffled. They needed to find out what was going on. So they carried out hundreds of experiments and soon realized that they'd made an extraordinary discovery. It seemed that when a chemical was diluted to homeopathic levels, the result was a special kind of water. It didn't behave like ordinary water. It acted like it still contained the original substance. It was as if the water was remembering the chemical it had once contained. So Benveniste called the phenomenon the memory of water. At last, here was scientific evidence that homeopathy could work. Benveniste knew this was a radical suggestion, but there was a way to get his results taken seriously. He had to get them published in a scientific journal.
The result doesn't exist until it is admitted by the scientific community. It's like being a good opera singer but singing in your bathroom. That's fine, but it's not the Scala Milan or the Met or the Opera de Paris, whatever.
So he sent his work to the most prestigious journal in the world, a journal which for over 100 years has reported the greatest of scientific discoveries, Nature.
It was a place that everyone working in science recognizes to be a way of getting publicity of the best kind.
Benveniste's research ended up with one of the most powerful figures in science, the then editor of Nature, Sir John Maddox. Maddox knew that the memory of water made no scientific sense, but he couldn't just ignore work from such a respected scientist, so he agonized about what to do. Eventually, he reached a decision.
I said, okay, we'll publish your paper if you let us come and inspect your lab. And he agreed, to my astonishment.
So, in June 1988, Benveniste's research appeared in the pages of Nature.
Now, you'd have thought by the mid to late 80s, when these experiments were being conducted in France, that they would have already understood the importance of blind and double-blind studies when conducting this type of experiment. But apparently not. Certainly they did after this rather embarrassing debacle unfolded. And yes, most sort of clinical trials, clinical or psychological experiments like this would have been conducted with a double-blind protocol. For more details on this, have a look at this practical psychology video on double-blind studies.
It caused a scientific sensation. Benveniste became a celebrity. His memory of water made news across the world. He seemed to have found the evidence that made homeopathy scientifically credible. But the story wasn't quite over. Benveniste had agreed to let in a team from Nature. It was a decision he would live to regret. Maddox set about assembling his team of investigators, and his choices revealed his true suspicions. First, he chose Walter Stewart, a scientist and fraud-buster. But his next choice would really cause a stir. James Randi.
I looked in my books and I said, who's Randi? And I couldn't find any scientist called Randi.
That was because the amazing Randi isn't a scientist. He's a magician, but he's no ordinary conjurer. He's also an arch skeptic, a fierce opponent of all things supernatural.
James Randi was an awesome poacher-turned-gamekeeper, sadly no longer with us. As a trained magician, this training didn't stop him being incredibly sceptical of those who claimed to have magical powers or other supernatural and unexplained gifts and powers beyond the reach of scientific explanation. Perhaps one of the most famous things he did was show up Uri Geller on live American TV when it came to his claims on being able to bend spoons and perform other psychic tricks.
I called John Maddox and said, what is this? I thought you were coming with a scientist to discuss science.
But Randi felt he was just the man for the job. On one occasion, he had fooled even experienced scientists with his spoon-bending tricks.
Scientists don't always think rationally and in a direct fashion. They're human beings like anyone else. They can fool themselves.
So Randi became the second investigator.
Astonishing.
On the 4th of July 1988, the investigative team arrived in Paris, ready for the final showdown.
The first thing we did was to sit round the table in Benveniste's lab. Benveniste himself struck us all as looking very much like a film star.
I found him to be a charming, very continental gentleman. He's a great personality. He was very much in control.
We were quite relaxed because there was no reason why things should not go right.
The first step was for Benveniste and his team to perform their experiment under Randi's watchful gaze. They had to prepare 2 sets of tubes containing homeopathic water and ordinary water. If the homeopathic water was having a real effect, different from ordinary water, then homeopathy would be vindicated. As they plotted the results, it was clear the experiment had worked.
There were huge peaks coming up out of it, and that was very active results, very, very positive results.
The astonishing thing about these results is that they repeated the claim, they demonstrated the claim that a homeopathic dilution, a dilution where there were no molecules, could actually have some sort of an effect.
But Maddox had seen that the experimenters knew which tubes contained the homeopathic water and which contained the ordinary water. So, perhaps unconsciously, this might have influenced the results. So he asked them to repeat the experiment. This time, the tubes would be relabeled with a secret code so that no one knew which tube was which.
We went into a sealed room and we actually taped newspapers over the windows to the room that were accessible to the hall.
We recorded in handwriting which tube was which, and we put this into an envelope and sealed it so that nobody could open it or change it.
Hats off to nature here. I do wonder if scientific publications today would have the courage to do what he did then. We can only hope.
At this point, the investigation took a turn for the surreal as they went to extraordinary lengths to keep the code secret.
Walter and I got up on the stepladder and stuck it to the ceiling of the lab.
There it was, taped above us as all of this work went on.
Sticking an envelope to the ceiling was utterly ridiculous. There is no way you can associate that with science.
With the codes out of reach, the final experiment could begin. By now, Benveniste had lost control of events.
It was a madhouse. Randy was doing magician tricks.
Yes, I was doing perhaps a little bit of sleight of hand with an object or something like that, just to lighten the atmosphere.
Soon the analysis was complete. It was time to break the code to see if the experiment had worked. Benveniste and his team were brimming with optimism.
Oh my goodness, it was party time. Cracked crab's legs, magnums, literally, of champagne packed in ice.
We were going to be treated to a wonderful dinner. The press, many members of the press were there.
John and Walter and I were looking at one another to say, wow, if this doesn't work, it's going to be a...
Finally came the actual work of decoding the result.
There was much excitement at the table. Everyone was gathered around.
Benveniste felt sure that the results would support homeopathy and that he would be vindicated.
That didn't happen. It was just a total failure.
We said, well, nothing here, is there?
And immediately, the mood in the laboratory switched. People burst into tears.
It was general gloom.
The team wrote a report accusing Benveniste of doing bad science and branding the claims for the memory of water a delusion. Benveniste's scientific reputation was ruined.
Everybody believed that I'm totally wrong. It's simply dismissed. Your phone call doesn't ring anymore. It's just like actresses or actresses that are no more in fashion. The phone suddenly is silent.
For now, the memory of water was forgotten. Science declared homeopathy impossible once more. But strangely, that didn't cause homeopathy to disappear. Instead, it grew. Since the Benveniste affair, sales of homeopathic medicines have rocketed. Homeopathy has become a trendy lifestyle choice, one of the caring, all-natural medicines, more popular in the 21st century than ever before. Despite the skepticism of science, millions of people use it and believe it has helped them. Like Marie Smith. 15 years ago, Marie was diagnosed with a life-threatening blood disorder.
I was more concerned about my children. I used to have to look at, think, I might not be here one day for use. That was the worst part of it.
She tried everything that conventional medicine could offer, including drugs and surgery. Nothing seemed to work. Then she tried homeopathy. She took a remedy made from common salt.
It's like somebody putting you in the coffin and taking it back out again. That's just the way I felt. And the quality of my life changed completely.
Since then, Marie has been healthy, and she has no doubt it's homeopathy that's helped her.
I know it saved my life, and it's made my life a lot more different, yeah. I'm just glad I'm enjoying these grandchildren, which I never thought I would do.
There are thousands of cases like Marie's, and they do present science with a problem. If homeopathy is scientific nonsense, then why are so many people apparently being cured by it? The answer may lie in the strange and powerful placebo effect.
Never downplay the power of the placebo effect. It is real, has been studied, has very good actual statistics and data to back up its effectiveness. And bizarrely, these effects even occur when the participants know they're taking placebos. For more details on this, have a look at this fantastic video by SciShow on placebos work even if you know they're a placebo.
The placebo effect is one of the most peculiar phenomena in all science. Doctors have long known that some patients can be cured with pills that contain no active ingredient at all, just plain sugar, what they call a placebo. And they've noticed an even greater puzzle, that larger placebo pills work better than small ones. Coloured pills work better than white pills. The key is simply believing that the pill will help you. This releases the powers in our minds that reduce stress, and that alone can improve your health.
Stress hormones make you feel terribly uncomfortable. And the minute you relieve the anxiety, relieve the stress hormones, people do feel better, but that's a true physiological effect.
Scientists believe the mere act of taking a homeopathic remedy can make people feel better, and homeopathy has other ways of reducing stress.
And is there any particular time of day that you'll have that feeling?
No.
A crucial part of homeopathic care is the consultation.
The stress that you have at work, are those around issues that make you feel quite emotional?
No.
The main thing about a homeopathic interview is that we do spend a lot of time talking and listening to the patient. We would ask questions of how they eat, how they sleep, how much worry and tension there is in their lives, hopefully give them some advice about how to actually ease problems of stress.
I just feel I want to have something more natural.
Yeah.
So most scientists believe that when homeopathy works, it must be because of the placebo effect.
As far as I know, it's the only thing that is really guaranteed to be a perfect placebo. There is no medicine in the medicine at all.
It seems like a perfect explanation, except that homeopathy appears to work when a placebo shouldn't. When the patient doesn't even know they're taking a medicine. All over the country, animals are being treated with homeopathic medicines. Pregnant cows are given dilute cuttlefish ink. Sheep receive homeopathic silver to treat eye infections. Piglets get sulfur to fatten them up. A growing number of vets believe it's the medicine of the future, like Mark Elliott, who's used homeopathy his whole career on all sorts of animals.
Primarily it's dogs and horses, but we also treat cats, small rodents, rabbits, guinea pigs, even reptiles. I have treated an elephant with arthritis, and I've heard of colleagues recently who treated giraffes. It works on any species exactly the same as in the human field.
Mark made it his mission to prove that homeopathy works. He decided to study horses with Cushing's, a disease caused by cancer. He treated them all with the same homeopathic remedy. The results were impressive.
We achieved an overall 80% success rate, which is great because that is comparable with modern medical drugs.
To Mark, this was clear proof that homeopathy can't be the placebo effect.
You can't explain to this animal why the treatment it's being given is going to benefit it, or how it's potentially going to benefit it. And as a result, when you see a positive result in a horse or a dog, that to me is the ultimate proof that homeopathy is not placebo. Homeopathy works.
The animal results are undeniably interesting. However, tuning and non-blind studies are still a massive risk here. For example, we have here an individual veterinarian making claims about the effectiveness of homeopathic remedies on animals, but it is one person and his observations. They are already questionable, and it already brings to mind whether or not he's tuning his results, albeit unconsciously. And once again, these are medical practitioners conducting these experiments on usually very small numbers of patients, almost in some cases case studies. Yes, I know he's a vet, but he's still technically a medical practitioner, not a scientist. Again, see this amazing SciShow vid on Do Placebos Work for Animals?
But Mark's small trial doesn't convince the skeptics. They need far more evidence before they'll believe that homeopathic medicines are anything more than plain water.
I've heard it said that unusual claims require unusually good proof. That's true. For example, if I tell you that at my home in Florida in the United States I have a goat in my garden, you could easily check that out. Yeah, looks like a goat, smells like a goat, so the case is essentially proven. But if I say I have a unicorn, that's a different matter. That's an unusual claim.
To scientists, the claim that homeopathic water can cure you is as unlikely as finding a unicorn.
Yes, there is a unicorn, and it's called homeopathy.
Homeopathy needed the very highest standards of proof. In science, the best evidence there can be is a rigorous trial comparing a medicine against a placebo. And in recent years, such trials have been done with homeopathy. David Riley is a conventionally trained doctor who became intrigued by the claims of the homeopaths. He wanted to put homeopathy to the test and decided to look at hay fever. Both homeopathy and conventional medicine use pollen as a treatment for hay fever. What's different about homeopathy is the dilution.
The single controversial element is that preparing this pollen by the homeopathic method takes it to a point that there's not a single molecule of the starting material present. I confidently assumed that these diluted medicines were placebos.
David Riley recruited 35 patients with hay fever. Half of them were given a homeopathic medicine made from pollen. Half were given placebo, just sugar pills. No one knew which was which. For 4 weeks, they filled in a diary, measuring how bad their symptoms were. The question was, would there be a difference?
To our collective shock, a result came out that was very clear. Those on the active medication had a substantially greater reduction in symptoms than those receiving the placebo medicine. According to that data, the medicine worked.
But to be absolutely rigorous, Riley decided to repeat the study. And he got the same result. Then he went further and tested a different type of allergy. Again, the result was positive. But despite all these studies, most scientists refused to believe his research.
It became obvious that in certain minds, 100 studies, 200 studies would not change the mental framework. And so I'm sceptical that if 200 haven't changed it, I don't think 400 would change it.
The reason Riley's research was dismissed was because his conclusion had no scientific explanation. Skeptics pointed to the glaring problem. There was still no evidence as to how something that was pure water could actually work.
If you design a medication to take advantage of what we know about physiology, we're not surprised when it works. When you come up with no explanation at all for how it could work, and then claim it works, we're not likely to take it seriously.
To convince science, homeopathy had to find a mechanism. Something that could explain how homeopathic water could cure you. That meant proving that water really does have a memory. Then a scientist appeared to find that proof. Madeleine Ennis has never had much time for homeopathy. As a professor of pharmacology, she knows it's scientifically impossible.
I'm a completely conventional scientist. I have had no experience of using non-conventional medications and have no intention really of starting to use them.
But at a conference, Ennis heard a French scientist present some puzzling results. Results that seem to show that water has a memory.
Many of us were incredibly skeptical about the findings. We told him that something must have gone wrong in the experiments and that we didn't believe what he had presented.
He replied with a challenge.
I was asked whether, if I really believed my viewpoint, would I test the hypothesis that the data were wrong.
Ennis knew that the memory of water breaks the laws of science, but she believed that a scientist should always be willing to investigate new ideas. So the skeptical Ennis ended up testing the central claim of homeopathy. She performed an experiment almost identical to Benveniste's, using the same kind of blood cell. Then she added a chemical, histamine, which had been diluted down to homeopathic levels. The crucial question, would it have any effect on the cells? To find out, she had to count the cells one by one, to see whether they had been affected by the homeopathic water. The results were mystifying. The homeopathic water couldn't have had a single molecule of histamine, yet it still had an effect on the cells.
They certainly weren't the results that I wanted to see, and they definitely weren't the results that I would have liked to have seen.
Ennis wondered whether counting by hand had introduced an error, so she repeated the experiment using an automated system to count the cells. And astonishingly, the result was still positive.
I was incredibly surprised and really had great feelings of disbelief, but I know how the experiments were performed, and I couldn't see an error in what we had done.
You would have hoped a professor of pharmacology would have been more rigorous. But one scientist working alone increases the risk. It could be one scientist with one assistant here, but it's small numbers of scientists working in a relatively small operation to conduct these experiments. Scientists are only human after all, and when you've got small numbers or indeed individuals working alone like this, the likelihood of them tripping themselves up unconsciously is increased.
These results seem to prove that water does have a memory after all. It's exactly what the homeopaths have been hoping for.
If these results become generally accepted, it will revolutionize the view of homeopathy. Homeopathy will suddenly become this idea that was perhaps born before its time.
It's particularly exciting because it does seem to suggest that Benveniste was correct.
At last, here is evidence from a highly respected researcher that homeopathic water has a real biological effect. The claims of homeopathy might be true after all. However, the arch-skeptic Randy is unimpressed.
There are so many ways that errors or purposeful interference can take place.
As part of his campaign to test bizarre claims, Randy has decided to put his money where his mouth is. On his website is a public promise. To anyone who can prove the scientifically impossible, Randy will pay $1 million.
This is not a cheap theatrical stunt. It's theatrical, yes, but it's $1 million worth.
Proving the memory of water would certainly qualify for the $1 million. To win the prize, someone would simply have to repeat Ennis's experiments under controlled conditions. Yet no one has applied.
Where are the homeopathic labs, the biological labs around the world who say that this is the real thing? Who would want to make $1 million and aren't doing it?
So Horizon decided to take up Randy's challenge. We gathered experts from some of Britain's leading scientific institutions to help us repeat Ennis's experiments. Under the most rigorous of conditions, they'll see whether they can find any evidence for the memory of water.
Horizon's repetition of this experiment to verify whether or not water held a memory of chemicals that had passed through it was, as I said, an awesome use of public money. Getting actual, respected, credible scientists to repeat experiments and to impose all the necessary safeguards in terms of making them blind or double blind and preventing, as best as possible, any sort of tuning or biasing in the taking of results is exactly what you would expect from good science, and it is amazing that a public broadcaster just paid to have good science done on the public purse. As I said before, if only they were still up to producing such valuable programming today.
We brought James Randi over from the United States to witness the experiment, and we came to the world's most august scientific institution, the Royal Society. The Vice President of the Society, Professor John Enderby, agreed to oversee the experiment for us.
But of course, as far as the experiments are concerned, they'll have totally different numbers.
And with $1 million at stake, James Randi wants to make sure there's no room for error.
Right, keeping the original sample, so I'm very happy with that provision. I'm willing to accept a positive result for homeopathy or for astrology or for anything else. I may not like it, but I have to be willing to accept it.
The first stage is to prepare the homeopathic dilutions. We came to the laboratories of University College London, where Professor Peter Mobbs agreed to produce them for us. He's going to make a homeopathic solution of histamine by repeatedly diluting 1 drop of solution into 99 drops of water.
Okay, now I'm transferring histamine into 9.9 mils of distilled water, and then we'll discard the tip.
For comparison, we also need control tubes, tubes that have never had histamine in them. For these, Peter starts with plain water.
Here it goes.
This stage dilutes the solutions down to 1 in 100, that's 1 C. We now have 10 tubes. Half are just water diluted with more water, the control tubes, half are histamine diluted in water. These are all shaken, the crucial homeopathic step. Now he dilutes each of the tubes again. To 2C. Then to 3C. All the way to 5C.
The histamine's now been diluted 10,000 million times. Still a few molecules left in there, but not very many.
Then we asked Professor of Electrical Engineering, Hugh Griffiths, to randomly relabel each of our 10 tubes. Now only he has the code for which tubes contain the homeopathic dilutions and which tubes contain water.
Okay, so there's the record of which is which. Encase it in aluminium foil, and then seal it in this envelope here.
Next, the time-consuming task of taking these solutions down to true homeopathic levels. UCL scientist Rachel Pearson takes each of the tubes and dilutes them down further, to 6C. That's 1 drop in 20 swimming pools. To 12C, a drop in the Atlantic. Then to 15C, 1 drop in all the world's oceans. The tubes have now been diluted 1 million times. Some are taken even further down, to 18C. Every tube, whether it contains histamine or water, goes through exactly the same procedure. To guard against any possibility of fraud, Professor Enderby himself recodes every single tube. The result is 40 tubes, none of which should contain any molecules of histamine at all. Conventional science says they are all identical. But if Madeline Ennis is right, her method should tell which ones contain the real homeopathic dilutions. Now we repeat Ennis's procedure. We take a drop of water from each of the tubes and add a sample of living human cells. Then it's time for Wayne Turnbull at Guy's Hospital to analyse the cells to see whether the homeopathic water has had any effect. He'll be using the most sophisticated system available, a flow cytometer.
Loading it up, bringing it up to pressure. Essentially, the technology allows us to take individual cells and push them past a focused laser beam. A single stream of cells will be pushed along through the nozzle head and comes straight down through the machine. The laser light will be focused at each individual cell as it goes past. Reflected laser light is then being picked up by these electronic detectors here.
By measuring the light reflected off each cell, the computer can tell whether they've reacted or not.
This is actually a very fast machine. I can run up to 100 million cells an hour. Whoa.
But to be absolutely rigorous, we asked a second scientist, Marion Macy at the Royal London Hospital, to perform the analysis in parallel. Our two labs get to work. Using a flow cytometer, they measure how many of the cells are being activated by the different test solutions. Some tubes do seem to be having more of an effect than others. The question is, are they the homeopathic ones? At last, the analysis is complete. We gather all the participants here to the Royal Society to find out the results. First, everyone confirms that the experiment has been conducted in a rigorous fashion.
I applied my own numbering system to these. Started off with a 5.4 million oxidation.
We eventually did arrive at a protocol that we were happy with.
Then there's the small matter of the $1 million.
James, is the cheque in your pocket ready now?
We don't actually carry a cheque around. It's in the form of negotiable bonds, which will be immediately separated from our account and given to whoever should win the prize.
We ask the firm to fax us confirmation that the $1 million prize is there.
Okay, now look, I'm going to open this envelope.
Now, at last, it's time to break the code. On hand to analyse the results is statistician Martin Bland.
59.
We've divided the tubes into those that did and didn't seem to have an effect in our experiment.
62.
Each tube is either a D for the homeopathic dilutions or a C for the plain water controls.
52 and 75 were C's.
Rachel Pearson identifies the tubes with a C or D. If the memory of water is real, each column should either have mostly C's or mostly D's. This would show that the homeopathic dilutions are having a real effect, different from ordinary water. There's a hint that the letters are starting to line up.
Column 1, we've got 5 C's and a D. Column 3, we've got 4 C's and a D. So let's press on. 1, 4, 8 and 9. 28.
But as more codes are read out, the true result becomes clear. The C's and D's are completely mixed up. The results are just what you'd expect by chance. A statistical analysis confirms it. The homeopathic water hasn't had any effect.
There's absolutely no evidence at all to say that there is any difference between the solutions that started off as pure water and the solution that started off with histamine.
What this has convinced me is that water does not have a memory.
So Horizon hasn't won the $1 million. It's another triumph for James Randi. His reputation and his money are safe. But even he admits this may not be the final word.
Further investigation needs to be done. This may sound a little strange coming from me, but if there is any possibility that there's a reality here, I want to know about it. All of humanity wants to know about it.
Homeopathy is back where it started, without any credible scientific explanation. That won't stop millions of people putting their faith in it, but science is confident. Homeopathy is impossible.